Good Thursday morning, everyone. I want to continue to share some of the places that I visited in Israel while I was on sabbatical. And today I want to talk about Cana. Remember, that's the place where Jesus performed his first sign or miracle. And when we visited Cana on February 11th, we went inside the wedding church that was built on the site of an ancient church built in the 4th century by Helena, mother of Constantine, to commemorate Jesus' first miracle. Now, the ruins were found in the 1600s by visitors, and further excavation found ruins of houses from as early as the 1st century. Cana's land was sold to the Knights Hospitaller in 1254 by the Lord of Sidon, and Franciscan order came to Cana in 1641. They began to build the present wedding church over the ancient ruins, but over the years it fell into disrepair and was rebuilt in 1883 and consecrated. Franciscans have built the wedding church to remember the amazing miracle that began the ministry of Jesus Christ. Now here's a picture inside the wedding church. Couples from all over the world come and gather at the front to have their vows renewed. When we were there were about 10 or 12 couples. The priests do this ceremony several times each day. We were able to go under the church to an area with the ancient ruins, possibly from the time of Jesus. And when we exited the church and began to walk down the narrow streets, we saw at every turn Cana wedding wine, and people were hawking their wares, wanting us to come in and taste the Cana wedding wine. It was very touristy. Now let's revisit the story. John 2, verses 1 through 11. In the gospel account, Jesus and his mother and disciples were all invited to the wedding. And when the wine runs out, Jesus' mother tells Jesus. I think Jesus' response to her is very interesting. In the New International Version, it says in verse 4, Jesus replied, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." And in the Contemporary English Version, it says, Jesus replied, "Mother, my time has not yet come. You must not tell me what to do." It sounds like a son who is put out with his mother, doesn't it? Jesus was a human just like all of us. He was a son and probably got irritated with his mother once in a while. This seems to be one of the times. However, I find this story interesting because Jesus did as his mother asked. He honored her. But he didn't just turn the water into wine, he turned it into the best wine. Jesus didn't turn the wine into yellowtail wine. He turned it into Dom Perignon wine. Now, before you judge me, I had to Google fine wines and cheap wines to get those titles because I have no clue. This fact reminded me that when we follow God's path for our lives, we experience the Dom Perignon life. When we follow our own paths, we experience the yellowtail life. What do I mean by this? God's guidance and path for our lives is so much better, so much bigger, so much more wonderful than we could ever plan. Now, I have an example. Many of you have heard my testimony or my journey into ministry. It started back in my 20s. My husband Tom and I were very active in our home church in Montgomery, Alabama. It was a 3,000 member church, very large. And I became the part-time outreach activities secretary there. We had a large gym that had a lot of activities that had to be coordinated, and we had outreach activities each week that had to be planned. Now, as part of the church staff, I was privy to what happened at the church during the week. I saw how some church members would have bees in their bonnets, come into the church office, rip the ministers up, and leave, and then on Sunday act like nothing ever happened. And I'll be honest, I had trouble with that. Anyway, my husband Tom had been ordained a deacon at age 29, and he and I ministered to 12 families in the deacon family ministry. One night after a deacon's meeting, Tom came home and he said, "I think God is calling me into the ministry." Well, knowing what I knew of the ministry, I said, "No, he's not." Tom had a great deacon friend that told him, "If God is calling you into the ministry, he's calling your family into the ministry too." So Tom waited. It took me 2 years of struggling with God. And before I really realized that we could do nothing else, we were going into the ministry. At the time, our daughters were in the 2nd grade and kindergarten. And we had some Sunday school teachers that just loved us and were of quite a bit of monetary means. And when they found out that we were going into the ministry, they wanted to meet with us. When they came over, they asked me a question. Cynthia, what would you study if you could go to college and seminary? Well, I replied that we didn't have the resources for both of us to go. I was going to work and put Tom through. They told us that they thought it was important for Tom and I to both prepare for ministry together, and they wanted to make a way for that to happen. I was floored. You see, I didn't have the opportunity to go to college because my family couldn't afford it. As it turns out, this wonderful couple supported Tom and I in so many different ways for 7 years, 4 years of college and 3 years of seminary. Now, when I entered college, I had no clue where God was leading me. It was as I studied that I gravitated toward children's ministry. I had worked with children in church for years, in Sunday school, children's choirs, RAs, GAs, discipleship training, so it was a natural direction for me. The journey God has guided me on has been such a wonderful journey. Yes, there have been trials, like in 2005 when Tom died with cancer. But God has never wavered or left me. I have felt God's leadership all along the way. And I have experienced so much more than I could ever have imagined. I've been called and ministered to 4 different churches and have traveled to so many countries on mission trips and sabbaticals. Now, I share all of this to say that I never had big dreams for my life. Growing up in the deep South in Alabama, the only thing I aspired to be was a wife, a mother, and maybe a secretary. When I was little, all I wanted to be was Barbie and have a great condo and a convertible car. My dreams were tiny compared to what God had in store for me. But when I finally surrendered to God's leadership, God blessed me with so much more than I could have planned for myself. God has given me a Dom Perignon life, not the whitetail life that I had in mind. When you spend more time with God, God will begin to lead you if you allow God to do so. Trust that God has bigger plans for you, better plans for you, greater plans for you than you could ever imagine. Learn to surrender to God's leadership. You will be surprised at where God will lead you. Trust me, I know. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "With all your heart you must trust the Lord and not your own judgment. Always let God lead you, and God will clear the road for you to follow." Trust God's leadership.